Caller, you're live on the air. Please tell us your name, where you're calling from.
Hello, this is Heidi Kornfeld, and this call is for Rabbi Tovia Singer. Thank you so much. I've enjoyed all the programs I watch you speak. And my question is, if the women that were coming to clean Jesus in his tomb with oils and fragrances and so on, how could they have removed the stone that supposedly was massive? That's just impossible. That it was supposed to be so big that they needed strong people, men, to remove it. And the reason they didn't want to risk anyone opening it is because they put on a big stone. Okay, that's number one. But number two, it didn't make sense that they would wait until the next day or after 3 days to clean the body. It would have been cleansed the same day they put him in the tomb. So either the tomb had a rock that was massive and unopenable by regular strength, or the stone was small and it could be removed. And so the story doesn't line up with the physicality of just moving such a stone. So when the body was gone, when they came and they saw the tomb open and they went in and the body was gone, that's the mystery, right? So either they opened the stone, somebody took the body, and that was the end of it, or this never happened. Thank you so much.
It's a good question, and as it turns out, your question is addressed in the Christian Bible. At least the stone part is. But we are entering into the second most convoluted narrative in the Gospels, and that's the Passion narratives. So as it turns out, this issue is addressed very directly in the Gospels of how is the stone going to be moved away. A huge stone is placed in front of the tomb. How is it going to be moved? And in fact, in the book of Mark, the women themselves wonder to each other. There are 3 women in Mark who are going, how are we going to ever move away the stone from the front of the tomb? When they arrive, the stone is gone. The stone has already been removed. Matthew has a more elaborate story where in Matthew, women come to the tomb and there's this huge earthquake and an angel rolls away the stone from the front of the tomb and sits on it. So Matthew solves that dilemma. Mark doesn't know about an earthquake. Women don't say anything like that. So this issue is solved. In Luke, the stone is already rolled away. There's not one, but there are 2 men in the book of Luke who Luke wants us to believe those are angels. And in John, you have the stone was already rolled away, and you have 2 angels, one at the head, one at the feet. So there's a difference here, but I would submit that of all the problems in the Passion narratives, this is the least interesting. It's the part of your question at the end that's the kicker, and that is, why would anyone visit a tomb 3 days after a corpse is buried to anoint it and put spices with this? Why would you put spices on a body that's been decaying for 3 days? This is the kicker. And this is what everyone misses. People are very consumed with how many women came to the tomb, whether 1, like in John, whether 4+, whether 3, whether 2. I don't think this is very important. But why would women come to a tomb 3 days after the burial on the third day to anoint and put spices with the body. That's insane, because what do you think a body looks like after it's been decomposing for 3 days inside of a tomb? Why would you add spices to it? Like, what's the point of this? Why would you anoint a decaying body? You know what a body looks like after it's been interred for 3 days? It's not pretty. Spices, you don't need. What do you need spices for? Like, no one ever did this. They don't do this because it's completely invented. And as it turns out, the book of John solves this problem. The book of John chronologically was written last of all the Gospels and appears last in the canon. And the book of John solves this and does away with this whole issue altogether by having Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus actually add spices to the body before the body's ever buried. And just see the end of John 19. They came and took care of all the spices to add to the body before it's buried, before it's put in the tomb, which completely contradicts Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Now, the reason is that John, he does this frequently, corrects other Gospels, and other Gospels are all correcting each other. This is not, John wasn't the only editor, so this goes on quite frequently. The elephant in the room is, why would you add spices to a dead, decaying body? The whole point of placing spices with a body prior to burial is so that the decaying corpse does not give off an odor which would be considered a bizoin hames, which would be considered a desecration, would be desecrating the dead. So they would have spices bundled together with the body on the way to internment, in the way to be put in a grave, or on the way to be put in a tomb. Because along the way, when you have a funeral, a levaya, so as the body is being brought to the tomb, it's considered a disgrace to the deceased that the body should give off an odor, because the science on this is straightforward. From the moment any living thing dies, decay begins immediately. We may not be that familiar with this today because we have refrigeration, which does not halt decay, but it certainly slows down the process. But before there was refrigeration, this was a major issue, especially in a temperate climate like Jerusalem, where for 8-9 months of the year, the weather was nice, very comfortable, 70s, 80s. So this is a big issue. But why would you go to a body that has been in the grave and then add spices later? That's insane. That's a plot device that was completely invented. Moving away the stone, the gospel writers actually walk through that issue. And 3 of the 4 say that it just was somehow, when they got there, the stone was already rolled away. One of them, Matthew, chronologically, the second gospel, appears first in the New Testament, has a more elaborate scene where there's an earthquake and an angel rolls away the stone and sits on the stone. In Matthew, the angel sits on the stone that he rolls away. I don't think this is a big deal, but it's different, in Mark and Luke and John, they're inside the tomb. I don't think that's a big deal. The big deal is, why why is there a return to the grave? Why would someone go back to the grave to add spices? That never happened. That's completely made up. I don't know if I should go further. It is also a much bigger contradiction is like, how did the women discover that Jesus rose from the dead? How did Mary Magdalene? Because Mary Magdalene is front and center in all the resurrection accounts. She appears 11 times in the Passion narratives alone. She's everywhere in the resurrection accounts. Why is another story. You can ask me that. But the question is, how does Mary, here's something that there can't be an answer to. How does Mary Magdalene discover that Jesus rose from the dead? Tell me that. So this is a big problem. And this is where you have a real contradiction that cannot be solved. As far as the Synoptic Gospels are concerned, Mary Magdalene finds out that Jesus rose from the dead from the angel or angels. Okay? In Matthew 28, for example, Mary Magdalene very much discovers at the tomb that Jesus rose from the dead. She's told to go back to the disciples. He will meet you in Galilee, and so on. And in fact, when Mary is on her way back to tell the disciples, along the way, she meets the risen Jesus, we're told. And she grabs Jesus and worships him, and Jesus essentially repeats the message that she already heard at the tomb. So she knows it. She knows it completely. In the book of John, this is not what happens at all. In the book of John, in chapter 20, when Mary Magdalene comes to the tomb, she finds it completely empty and goes back to the disciples and says, we don't even know where the body is. Someone took it away. Well, why would you think someone took it away if you met angels that told you it wasn't taken away, but it rose? It gets crazier because in John's gospel, when she returns, she sees two angels in the tomb, and the angels don't inform her about Jesus' resurrection or give her instructions about going to the Galilee. They ask her, why are you crying? She says that they took away the Lord's body. What do you mean they took away the Lord's body? I thought the angels informed you. She then turns around. I'm not making this up. Read John chapter 20. She then turns around and sees a man who she believes is the gardener. And she then asks the gardener, like, what's going on here? Did you move the body? Could you imagine that? I thought the angels informed her. And then he says, Mary, and she says, Rabboni, and bingo, she finds out what happened here. I mean, as far as Matthew is concerned, by the time Mary Magdalene meets Jesus for the first time, she already knows, she's already been informed at the tomb that Jesus rose from the dead. And therefore, internally at work, she sees Jesus, grabs him, and worships him. I don't want to get into that. In John chapter 20, Jesus says, don't touch me because I've not yet ascended to the Father, to your God and to my God. I want to because that's, I think, that's a minor contradiction. The question everyone should be asking is, why would you go back to a tomb to add spices to a body that's been interred for 3 days? And according to John, Nicodemus already took care of the spices on Friday. See John 19, 38, 39, 40. It's right there. And when Mary meets Jesus, for the resurrected Jesus, for the first time, has she already been informed that Jesus rose from the dead? According to John, she hasn't, and accuses the gardener, who turns out to be Jesus, of perhaps moving the body. Why would you think that he moved the body? You see how, so it is this, all this makes up for just a complete mess. And it, in terms of how contradictory these texts are, and I'm just touching the surface. In my book, Let's Get Biblical, in Volume 1, I have a fairly well-known chart that lays out all the manifold real contradictions that exist here. And this is only second to the infancy narratives, which is even more contradictory than the passion narratives. Anyways, thank you for your question.
אדון עולם אשר מלך בטרם כל יציר נברא